So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Great to have you all here. This is a Alumni Lounge, particularly for alumni, STARS alumni, for friends of STARS and for donors. We are going to have a great session with Tilmann and Alexander. Again, thank you very much for managing this session. I just wanted to tell you one thing. Last night we had a long board meeting of the STARS Foundation Board, and we decided to do the STARS Singapore Symposium and the STARS Switzerland Symposium this year. So we are very pleased and very much looking forward to seeing you, Xiang Guan, in Singapore soon in June. And the nomination invitations and all the information to all our stakeholders will be going out this week and next week. And we hope to have a great group of STARS participants in Singapore and in Switzerland. The one in China, we decided to postpone into 23. The dates are not decided upon. It could be in the second quarter or in the third quarter. But as soon as we know, depending on the situation, obviously, regarding the pandemic in China, we are going to inform you. So this is good news. We really look forward to having again physical STARS Symposia in Singapore and in Switzerland. Thank you very much again for attending this lounge. And Tilmann, the floor is yours now. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks for this update. Very quickly, we don't have much time, so thanks a lot for your interest. The idea from the German alumni was to have a topic which is super relevant, which is super interesting in all of our minds. To be honest, looking at the last 2 weeks, there would now be things which might be even more important. However, we decided still to do this. For 2 reasons. A, I think this is in general one of the mega themes, which I think it's just interesting to follow. Secondly, even to the current situations, of course, there's a connection to blockchain, to cryptocurrencies. There's a lot of questions which is also connected to this. So therefore, I think it's super relevant to have this lounge. With that, I welcome my colleague and friend Alex. Great that you made yourself available. I know you are one of the German-speaking, I would say, corifes, yeah, top shots in this area. So really great to have you. Thanks for your time. And with that, given that we are very limited in time, we really want to bring you content. I would hand over to you for a short presentation. Afterwards, you will have some Q&A. And also, of course, we got already some questions up front. So I'm very happy to ask you. But now the floor is yours. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Tilmann, and thanks a lot, Tony, Patricia, for the invitation today. I'm very happy to be here. And as Tilmann said, we have not a lot of time, so I would jump right into the presentation. I've brought a couple of slides. I'm happy to share those with you after the session if you're interested. Maybe just one sentence about myself. So I joined Deutsche Bank about 1.5 years ago. I'm in strategy, responsible for anything related to, we call this here, digital assets and currencies, which basically means how does blockchain technology affect us as a bank. And before that, I basically came from being a researcher in Switzerland at the University of St. Gallen. I'm actually also sitting in Switzerland right now. Did a PhD in St. Gallen, worked some time at the European Central Bank, spent some time at Stanford, and then joined Deutsche Bank. And today I want to talk about a topic that is part of my life for a very long time, and namely cryptocurrencies or blockchain in general. And what I usually try to do is, instead of showing you just a couple of statistics, I much rather use the time in order to give you the intuition of what blockchain actually is, what it means, and what cryptocurrencies and other tokenized forms of assets and money can do, and what maybe changes in the way we make payments or transactions in general when we have blockchains and tokens compared with the system we are using today. And that's also exactly the kind of main theme of this first slide, and I would spend a couple of minutes on that slide because I think this is a very important one because it shows you how we have done transactions, payments, or exchange of value very generally in the past, how we do it today, and how we might do it based on blockchains and tokens, including cryptocurrencies in the future. So you see here basically 3 steps along the way. And the first one is a physical exchange of money and goods. And this is, of course, how we do trade for probably thousands of years. So we have physical objects that we use for payments, and we have physical goods, and we simply exchange those two. So I'm handing over Tilmann a 10 euro banknote. So that's a physical payment. And that's very important. At the moment in time where Tilmann receives these 10 euros, he will be satisfied because at this point in time, this payment is final and done, and we can kind of and leave, and everyone is happy. So that's how we used to do trading and payments. Then what we did, let's say about 100 years ago, and that's kind of the second part here, the middle layer, we digitalized. It's important now to distinguish the word digitize and digitalize. So we digitalized the way of making a payment or the way of exchanging value. So instead of running around with physical objects, we are now able to make payments using digital tools. And this is what you would call digitalization, a digitalization of a process. So basically, if I want to do a payment today, what I need to do is I first need to identify myself to a bank, for instance, by typing in a PIN. And then what happens is not that the bank is sending around paper notes, but what the bank is sending around is basically text messages, right? On a really high level. If I'm making a payment to Tilmann's bank, it would be basically a text message from my bank to Tilmann's bank saying, hey, my client Alex wants to transact 10 euros to your client Tilmann. Please update your database and add 10 euros to the account of Tilmann. At the same time, I will subtract 10 euros from my client Alex. That's basically how payments are working today. It's banks and other, of course, intermediaries communicating with each other and making sure, and that's now the very important point here, that each of these individual databases which these intermediaries manage are up to date and reconciled. So this process of updating individual databases and this process of reconciliation, which means we make sure that these databases still fit together in the end, that's kind of really at the heart of our current financial system. And this is how not only payments work, but also how you would say, if I want to purchase a stock, it works in a very similar way. You just have additional intermediaries like a central securities depository and an exchange, and maybe a couple of others. It's always individual institutions, intermediaries managing their own databases and communicating with each other, making sure that these databases fit together in the end. That's one way of describing our current financial system. And this is what we call the digitalization of payments or the digitalization of trading. Now, when making the last step now, and here we now come to the topic of blockchains and tokens, we are not only digitalizing a process, but what we do with blockchains and tokens is we digitize the money and the goods themselves. So it's nice that we have two different words here in English. In German, we only have one word for it, Digitalisierung. In English, we actually have digitalization and digitization. And when we talk about tokens, we really mean the digitization of the assets themselves. So we are basically representing money and also other goods potentially as a digital token on a blockchain. And it's a bit like going back to the roots, like these physical exchange, but now we can do this in the digital realm. So on a very high level, and of course I'm simplifying now, what blockchain enables us to do is that I can make a peer-to-peer payment to Tilmann, for instance. I can send him 10 tokenized euros without being dependent on any intermediary. Today, if I want to make a digital payment, I have to use intermediaries. In a blockchain world or a token world, I can make this peer-to-peer payment digitally without having to rely on an intermediary. And kind of the technology which enables us to do this is the blockchain technology. And we won't have time today to go into detail how this exactly works, but on a very high level, what's happening here is that instead of me having to tell my bank, could you please update your database, and tell the other bank to update its database, we only have one database here in this financial system. And this database is shared among every participant, and every participant kind of holds a copy of that database. And what I can do if I want to make a payment to Tilmann is I can directly write into the database, Alex sends Tilmann 10 tokenized euro or 10 tokenized US dollars. And everyone can see immediately that this transaction has happened. And that's basically how this shared database works. And now, of course, you might immediately think, okay, that's nice, but how on earth can something like this work? If anyone can write into the database, I'm making this transaction, what prevents, for instance, me from sending the same 10 euros to Tilmann and to Patricia, for instance? And that's exactly an issue that's known as the so-called double spend. And that's, of course, the main issue you would have to solve if you want to have one of these shared decentralized databases. And that's exactly the issue that the Bitcoin white paper has solved in 2008. So whatever you think of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, it's for sure the case that it has been a revolution, I would say, in database technology or computer science, because for the first time, the Bitcoin white paper has introduced a solution to a decentralized co-owned database where everyone can write into, but still there is a process that ensures that whatever becomes part of the database is the truth. And the process that makes sure that only like valid transactions end up in that shared database, it's known as the consensus mechanism. And in case of Bitcoin, for instance, the major part of this consensus mechanism is proof of work. You might know that. That's this mechanism that consumes a lot of energy. There are other mechanisms, but these are basically the mechanisms or algorithms that ensure that everyone can write into this database, but in the end, only the truth or valid transactions end up in the database. And how exactly that works, it has to remain a bit of a black box for us today, but I just want to make sure that kind of this intuition becomes clear that currently we are working with our financial system is based on many centralized databases kept by intermediaries, and we need these reconciliation processes. And these reconciliation processes become more and more cumbersome the more intermediaries are involved. For instance, if you want to do a cross-border payment or kind of a complex transaction. While in a blockchain world and with distributed ledger technology, there is only one database which is shared among all participants, and I myself can write into this database. And instead of a reconciliation process, what I now need is a consensus algorithm that makes sure that in the end only valid transactions end up in this database. And now it doesn't matter when we talk about blockchain, whether this blockchain now is a ledger that keeps track of Bitcoin transactions or digital euro transactions, or even transactions made with a tokenized security. So we are on a very high level simply talking about tokens, and a token can represent various things. And this is what I'm trying to show here on this slide. We basically have our existing financial system today, and we have a potential blockchain ecosystem, or you could also say a tokenized economy. And what we do today is we are representing assets as well as money as digital token on a blockchain. And in case of assets, this can be really any assets you can think of. So it can be financial assets, a security, but it can also be real estate, art. It can also be intangible assets like copyright, for instance, or a patent. And money is, of course, the euro, the US dollar, etc. And what we do is basically we take out the euro from its account where it sits today with a bank, and we represent it as a digital token on a blockchain. And so basically the euro or the US dollar then becomes a stable coin or potentially a central bank digital currency or other forms of money tokens. And the security now becomes a security token. And the art piece might become one of these infamous non-fungible tokens, for instance. And the reason why we might be doing this is because when you represent these assets and money on a blockchain as a token, you can do different things with it. You can do hopefully more efficient and other things with a token compared to an account-based system. So for instance, and there are many things you can do, but I'm just mentioning one or two examples, you can fractionalize these assets. So if I'm tokenizing a real estate, a building, I can split it up into 1 million tokens and make it investable and liquid, because I can own 0.1% of this building, and I can trade this token against the tokenized money, for instance. You have 24/7 availability. You have something like programmability, right? I can program my payment. I can, for instance, say if X amount of liters of rain come down in Zurich on Friday afternoon, if the threshold of X liter is passed, please make a payment from account X to account Y. This is something I can also do with tokenized money and blockchain. And that's this whole world of tokenized assets and tokenized money. And what's really important is that we distinguish this tokenized assets and tokenized money world from the cryptocurrency world. Because as you can see here, there is nothing that kind of backs or stands behind a cryptocurrency in the real world. So while when I'm tokenizing a euro, it's of course the euro that exists in the real world. When I'm tokenizing a building, the building of course exists in the real world. And I just have this token which represents the ownership to this building. But in the end, it's the building is behind this token. While when we talk about Bitcoin or Ether or any other cryptocurrency, there is of course nothing in the real world that backs this token. So this is why they are called native cryptocurrencies. And that's the main reason why we are having this discussion of whether Bitcoin should be worth something at all, because in the end, nothing backs it. So it's just a bits and bytes, right, on a database. Why should this have value at all? And I'm happy to dig deeper into that during our discussion. But that's basically the very important distinction between tokenized assets, money, and this whole cryptocurrency world. Okay, last slide here, just to give you a last overview when we now talk about digital money. So I'm basically focusing now on the right-hand side of this figure here. So cryptocurrencies and tokenized money. What always helps me a lot, and I know there are hundreds of different forms of cryptocurrencies and digital money, whatever. What helps me a lot is to distinguish the different forms of digital money that exist along the issuers. So who is kind of issuing this money? And here we can basically distinguish between a public issuer, a private issuer, and no issuer at all. And when we talk about public issuers of digital money, we basically talk about central bank digital currencies. So it's the governments, the central banks that give out a digital currency. And I usually call this the money of the state. On the other hand, we have private issuers, which are banks, for instance, but also stablecoin issuers. So non-bank institutions are also issuing digital money. And here we talk about stablecoins. They can be regulated or unregulated. Talk about something that's called a tokenized deposit, where basically banks start to tokenize their commercial bank money. And this is what I usually call the money of the corporations. And then last but not least, and that's kind of new and special, that's the cryptocurrencies which have no issuer at all. And that's Bitcoin and Ether, etc. There is no one, no institution behind those cryptocurrencies. They are simply decentralized protocols. And this is why I usually call them money of the people, because it's kind of a new decentralized form of money. Okay, Tilmann, let me stop here, and I'm happy to dive into the discussion.
Super. First of all, Alex, thanks a lot for using this super short time frame to give us, I think, a very complete overview, which helps to understand this whole complex world. Before I open to everyone to ask questions, maybe I have one question of my own, and then we got already one question which I would like to share with you, and then happy for all of you to have further questions. So one question is, and I come from the point that there's a lot written in newspapers, and we should not believe everything what is written in newspapers, but it's a lot that, and you mentioned it for, especially I think for Bitcoin, you said proof of work, which means they have to, let me phrase it in my words, they have to solve quests, kind of mathematical quests. These quests are designed to that computers can solve them, and in the end, the one who's, I hope I understood correctly, kind of the fastest, he kind of can then confirm one of these blocks, and then we know what is the truth, which is the ultimate goal, to have one single truth. The problem with it is that is what I understand. This kind of quest solving is a super thing if you do it on small scale, but the Bitcoin became so big that this quest solving has become a wide scale kind of an industry which uses, and the numbers are always different, but let's say the energy of Netherlands or Korea or so on and so forth. And my understanding is we're living in a world where one of the key topics or key tasks of our generation is to save this world for the next generations. And therefore, where do you see this? Is this justifiable? Is this only a momentum, or is this really something which should concern? So my question is, should we accept for the advantage of this Bitcoin what we have and others which use the same system, this kind of disadvantage, or is that maybe only one-sided to look at it?
Yeah, that's a great question, also a very difficult one, and I could probably talk a whole hour only about this question. I try to keep it really short. I think, and there are, as you said, Tilmann, a lot of discussions around the topic also in the media. I think the first thing, before we dive into that topic, does Bitcoin consume too much energy? We need to define what does too much mean. And this means we first need to agree on, does Bitcoin, and it's really, that's maybe a first point I want to reiterate, Tilmann, you're right. That's basically a discussion about Bitcoin. Most of all the other cryptocurrencies, and in particular these tokenized assets and money, which I've shown here, there are no concerns, no environmental concerns at all. That's really a Bitcoin discussion. So the question is really, does Bitcoin create any added value for us as a society or not? And if, I mean, the problem with these discussions is that usually people start this discussion by implicitly assuming Bitcoin does not create any added value. And then of course it consumes
difficult to defend,
yeah. So the discussion can stop there, right? But if we now agree that it might have any value added for our society, then the discussion becomes really complex, because then the question is, how much energy is too much? And where does this energy come from? Is it kind of green energy or not? Does maybe Bitcoin has an architecture that enables us to use, in particular, green energy? Mm-hmm. And many other questions. I think one thing that's just important to understand is the energy usage of Bitcoin is not a bug, but it's a feature. And I always see this, okay, Bitcoin is just this old technology and it will be kind of updated and reinvented and it will use less energy. This is not going to happen with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is using a lot of energy and it will use a lot of energy in the future. So it's not that there is a solution to get the same security of the network with less energy. I think that's important to understand. And based with these on these assumptions, we then have to have the discussion, is it too much or not? And are there maybe other solutions that are very similar to Bitcoin that have the same level of security and decentralization? And in my opinion, they are not. So if you want to have this maximum level of security and this maximum level of decentralization, there's probably only Bitcoin.
No, thanks for this answer. I got one question from Sangwan. Why are we not moving faster with introducing CBDCs? What is preventing us from establishing this? Because there are so many advantages that we see around. Why are not the central banks taking this up even quicker? What would you say?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, I mean, when we look globally, let's say US, Europe, and Asia, mainly China, I would say China is really leading kind of the team here when it comes to the introduction of central bank digital currencies. They have tested this now also during the Olympics. They have run, I think, 11 or 12 testing rounds already, and they're quite close to rolling this out at a national level. So they're quite far, but they have started, I believe, 6 or 7 years ago. The US and mainly in Europe, they only started really picking up the pace when it comes to central bank digital currencies in June 2019. And this was the month where back then Facebook announced its Libra project. So this stablecoin Libra, which has then been renamed to Diem and now has been sold to a Silvergate bank in the US. But this was kind of the starting point for most of the central bank to work intensely on CBDC. And I mean, I have worked at the European Central Bank for 1.5 years. Central bankers are, and I'm allowed to say that, are kind of the most conservative people I know, and they are probably not the fastest moving people. Like, a central bank is not an agile organization, and it's good that it's not. So being kind of quick in reinventing money, and that's kind of what we do, right? So a product that hardly changes or has hardly changed over thousands of years, kind of reinventing this product. It's no surprise to me that this takes a couple of years. I mean, on the one hand, it's complex. On the other hand, it takes a long time for central banks to even decide, do I want to have a CBDC or not? And I think all these reasons add up. Additionally, we need to be very cautious, of course. We cannot simply throw a CBDC into the economy and see what happens. And all these reasons add up to these timelines of, I would say, 7-8 years from starting to kind of introducing a CBDC.
Thank you. Any further question from the audience? To be honest, I'm not sure if you just can talk, or if you have to raise your hand. So if you want to ask a question and it does not work for any reason, just write it in the chat. I think that should work definitely. If not, I would. My next question goes a little bit, of course. A lot of people think, is it worth to invest in these cryptocurrencies? So, and then of course I completely understand there's a lot of use cases, business models which can build around it. You mentioned there is kind of, payments can be programmer payments, you can add some features or kind of that a payment directly is linked to a different action or a different information inflow. One thing is, and I think my understanding is what I heard, we have to distinguish in this way to say, is this kind of tokenized asset for payments, or is it more also to store value? And one of the reasons, my understanding was that people who promoted Bitcoin, but also other of these cryptonized assets, would say it will store value similar like gold. And I think, by the way, I think gold, the mining of gold uses much more energy still than Bitcoin does. So this brings a lot to my first question a little bit maybe in balance, and we still say, yeah, gold is important, and not only for our teeth, but in general. So so therefore, my question is, what we see is that the idea, I think, was that cryptocurrencies should be more stable against inflation. That was one, I think, of the strong arguments also, but also against kind of market disruption or market changes. However, what we at least, and that's my question to you, at least so far see, when the stock market, which is a very volatile market, as we all know, goes down, so does, I think, in general, the crypto market. So do you think this, and this is something which we just see now because the crypto market is still too small, or is there at least the reason to say, hey, this crypto market or crypto asset should be used to stabilize and your wealth, and also be a protection against inflation? Maybe not true, because this is just not adoptable.
Yeah, I think you can really distinguish here between a theoretical answer and an empirical answer to that. And the empirical answer is very clearly, as you said, Tilmann, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are highly correlated with the general market. So they move very much in tandem with stocks and the general market environment, let's say. However, I agree that probably the market is still too small, and also the kind of time frame is too short. We have for most of them just a couple of years of data. Now, the reason why theoretically there are very strong reasons for why in particular Bitcoin could be a very good store of value is the following, and maybe I can use this slide for it. Bitcoin is the first asset, the very first asset, and I'm challenging you here if you can think of another asset that combines the following three characteristics. It's decentralized, meaning there is no institution behind it that issues it. It's scarce in the sense of you cannot simply multiply it, copy and paste it, and it's digital. So digital, scarce, and decentralized. That's the idea. It's really the easiest way of describing it is really digital gold. So you see here, we have something like gold, which is scarce and decentralized, but not digital. And Bitcoin adds digital, right? And we have things that are digital and scarce. For instance, an ebook from Amazon, you cannot simply copy and paste it, but the reason for this is because there is an Amazon behind it, so it's not decentralized. And of course, you have things that are digital and decentralized, which are not scarce, like an email attachment, right? I can attach something to my email, send it to Tilmann, and he can send it to 100 of his friends, and of course, then it's multiplied. And the reason why Bitcoin is so special, it was the first digital asset that has no institution behind it and that is scarce. And that's really the reason why people also call it the money of the internet, right? We have something that consists of bits and bytes, but I cannot simply copy and paste it as I can do it with any other document that relies on bits and bytes. And that's why it's kind of the first scarce digital asset. And this is why intuitively we would say, okay, cool, we can use this in order to store value, because I cannot simply multiply it, and there is no one behind it which can inflate the monetary supply of Bitcoin. That's kind of the theoretical reason why it might be a good store of value.
No, thanks. Now we got several questions. Given that we are officially at the end of our time, I would say let's do two final questions together. The first question is, do you think what we are currently see about cryptocurrencies is a real hype, which brings us also back, I think, to our title? Is it a bubble, or will it stand the test of time? That's the first question. Maybe you can give a short answer on that. The second one is, and I think we got several to that one, is what is the role of banks? And I'm pretty sure alone of that one you can talk hours, but maybe you can, do banks have to be afraid that they be obsolete, or what could be the potential role which banks can support this? Good luck to do that in 2 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. That's a challenge for the end. Yeah. Okay. I'll try to be quick. So is crypto a hype? I would say crypto in general, no. I think we have to agree and come to the conclusion that this stuff is not going to disappear anymore. However, of course, there are a couple of things that are super hyped. So at the moment, the metaverse is super hyped. At the moment, non-fungible tokens are super hyped. And I always say, usually it starts with being 95% hype and 5% interesting technology. This was basically for crypto the case. This was for NFT the case. This is now for metaverse the case. But after, I mean, you know this Gartner hype cycle, right? After this hype phases, we end up with very interesting technological solutions for things that enable us to do things that we cannot do today. So that's true for crypto as well as for blockchain as a underlying technology in general. And that basically leads me to the second question when it comes to what is the role of banks? And of course, that's what I'm thinking a lot about this question. And here, I think it's important to understand, and this figure here is really good for that. Whenever we talk about cryptocurrencies, there are just a couple of things bank can do. We can, for instance, offer the custody for these cryptocurrencies. We can offer merchants to the acceptance of cryptocurrencies, the payments with cryptocurrencies, so services around these cryptocurrencies. So we can do stuff, but I would say it's limited. But when we talk about this tokenized assets and money world, there is a very, very big role for intermediaries to play for various reasons. I mean, one reason is if I'm tokenizing a building, who is tokenizing that building? Who makes sure that that building actually exists? So I cannot completely decentralize the process of tokenizing a building as much as I cannot completely decentralize the process of tokenizing a euro. There's still someone who issues this euro, and there's still someone who has to make sure that this euro is actually a euro. And there are many, many roles banks and other financial institutions, exchanges, insurance companies can play in this tokenized economy, I would say.
Super. We have a lot of more questions. I think we come still to the end of our time. Maybe one last question is, you said, and I think this is a super interesting question also, Bitcoin and as others is a scarce resource. However, every day we see new cryptocurrencies. Why can I not found a Bitcoin 2.0? I think it's a super, super fair question. Maybe you can take this as a last one, but then I think I would stop it here because I think we should stick to our time. And I know this is a Swiss organization, so the rules are very strict. But I think given that this one is also, I think, so interesting maybe for a wider audience, why not?
Yeah. So that's indeed a very good question. And it's super easy to create Bitcoin 2.0. So I can create an Alex Bitcoin immediately by simply copy and pasting the Bitcoin code. It's out there. Everyone can copy it and have his or her own Bitcoin. The problem is you need a whole community and a network in order to achieve decentralization. So what you would have if you create your own Bitcoin is you would give out a digital token, which is actually scarce, but you will be the only person on this blockchain and no one else would be there. So the first thing you would need to have is you need people who are using this token. You would have to convince people to use this token. And more importantly, if you use the Bitcoin code, you need to convince miners to come onto your network and actually invest real money and energy in order to create security for your network. And to be honest, the way Bitcoin occurred, it took basically 4, 5, 6 years until Bitcoin reached a level of decentrality that I would say it's secure enough that it cannot be hacked by an individual party. And it's almost impossible to kind of bootstrap that really organically. So all the new coins you see are very centralized in the beginning and try to move towards decentralization over time by investing a lot of money and a lot of effort. So even though I can simply copy and paste the code, recreating the Bitcoin network is, I would say, close to impossible.
Thanks a lot. With that, I would say, yeah, thanks to all of you. Thanks a lot for your time. Thanks, of course, special to you, Alex. And I think for me, it was interesting. I hope we brought you also some new information, some fruitful thoughts. And with that, yeah, all have a good day and then a good rest of the week.